All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a completely fascinating case out of Arizona that proves just how wild neighborhood drama can get. We're going to see exactly how a minor, everyday disagreement over some patio stucco escalated, literally, into a defining state court of appeals ruling that set a major legal precedent for homeowners everywhere.
So I want you to picture this. You decide to make a simple upgrade to the outside of your home. Maybe you just want to change the texture of your walls or reroute a couple of electrical wires. Easy enough, right? You hire a guy, do the work, and then bam, you are suddenly stopped in your tracks by your neighbors and the Homeowners Association. It begs the question, who actually has the final legally binding say on what you can and cannot do to your own property? Is it you, the HOA board, or is it the actual literal contract you signed when you bought the house? Here's our docket for today. We'll quickly cover 1. The neighborhood dispute, 2. The HOA claims authority, 3. The first court ruling, 4. The appeal and reversal, and finally, 5. The legal takeaway.
Section 1. The neighborhood dispute, stucco, wires, and trellises.
So, let's set the scene. Back in December 1999, the Boyles were doing some pretty simple landscape renovations at their home in the Pointe community. They changed their standard rough stucco to a smooth texture, and they left this tiny half-inch electrical conduit exposed instead of hiding it. Now, in the real world, this is just a weekend DIY project. But in HOA land, oh boy, it's the beginning of an all-out war.
Things escalated incredibly fast. The Boyles' neighbors, the Johnsons, were absolutely not having it. They formally objected to the HOA, demanding the Boyles get official approval for the stucco and completely hide that electrical wire. But the HOA board kind of just shrugged. They decided not to strictly enforce the rules. They informally let the Boyles keep the smooth stucco and basically just told them, hey, just paint the exposed wire Navajo white so it matches the house and we'll call it a day. Section 2. The HOA claims authority. We decide what's enforced.
Well, the Johnsons didn't accept the HOA's informal little waiver. For them, a rule is a rule, period. And this firm stance led straight to a Superior Court lawsuit in May 2001 for breach of contract. We're talking David and Wendee Johnson suing both the Pointe Community Association and the Boyles, the whole shebang.
Now, the HOA's main defense relied on this legal concept called judicial deference. They cited a prominent California case called Lambden, and essentially argued that when a community board makes a decision in good faith, courts really shouldn't second-guess them. They basically looked at the judge and said, look, we made a reasonable call to let them paint the pipe and leave the stucco alone, stay out of our neighborhood management.
Which brings us to Section 3, the first court ruling. The HOA wins round 1.
Believe it or not, the trial court actually agreed with the HOA, handing them a major early victory. Judge Pendleton Gaines ruled that even if the Boyles technically violated the strict deed restrictions, public policy meant the court must defer to the HOA's good faith decisions. The court effectively said, hey, the HOA had handled this internally, so we're staying entirely out of it, and they just dismissed the Johnsons' claims right then and there.
Moving right along to Section 4, the appeal and reversal, taking it to the next level.
The timeline here is just crazy. This escalated so fast. It went from a basic backyard aesthetic lawsuit in May 2001 to a civil appeal and all the way to a formal appellate opinion by July 2003. This super rapid progression proves the higher courts saw this as way more than just a silly dispute over paint. They saw it as a major, fundamental issue of contract law.
And that brings us to a massive turning point in this story. Judge Snow, writing for the appellate court, completely reversed the trial court. The appellate opinion explicitly rejected the whole idea that the HOA gets automatic judicial deference in interpreting these rules. Judge Snow wrote, and this is key, the interpretation of restrictive covenants is a question of law for the court. The court clarified that civil courts are there to provide a neutral interpretation and protect against overreaching. They absolutely do not just automatically defer to an HOA's reading of its own rules. Why? Because an HOA isn't some specialized administrative government agency, it's just a party to a contract.
Let's talk numbers, because this figure right here is crucial. $4,560. That represents the exact amount in attorney's fees that the lower court originally forced the Johnsons to pay the Boyles when they lost round 1. It's a tough pill to swallow, right? But because the appellate court dramatically reversed the decision, they vacated that financial award completely, meaning the Johnsons no longer had to pay thousands of dollars just for trying to enforce their own community contract.
Section 5, the legal takeaway,
Contracts over committees.
So, what does this all actually mean for us? Well, the appellate court made the legal reality crystal clear, with 3 main points. First, restrictive covenants. You know, those CC&Rs you sign a massive stack of papers for when you buy a house in an HOA? They form a strict, legally binding contract between all owners. Second, any modifications that alter the exterior appearance of a home absolutely require formal written approval, not just a casual, informal hand wave from the board over the fence. And third, courts are specifically there to provide a neutral reading of that contract to protect against an HOA overreaching or just failing to do its job. Basically, whichever way an HOA chooses to resolve an issue, they cannot simply forsake their express written duty to enforce the rules.
So we've gone from a petty neighborhood disagreement over some smooth stucco and a painted conduit, all the way up to a binding appellate decision on contract law. It's a wild ride. Knowing all of this, I want you to really think about your own community for a second. How much power does your neighborhood association actually have? Are your community rules being legally enforced as a strict ironclad contract, or are they just being informally waived by whoever happens to be sitting on the board today? It's a fascinating question, and as we've just seen, it's one that might just end up in court.